There are watches that are all about function, and there are watches that are all about hot horology characters. There are then some watches that showcase engineering marvels, and then there are some watches where everything on offer is simply an art. Born to Finnish family with a heritage of craftsmanship and jewelry designing in 1970, it was almost a given that Stepan Sarpaneva would grow to adopt the artistic traits and skills of the family. And when inheritance meets the individuality, the result is bound to be interesting. While Stepan's father was a bronze jewelry designer, Stepan himself was always inclined to stainless steel. This, however, wasn't only due to the form of steel, rather the tool nature of it. What's more interesting is that it was the repairing and building of bikes from the young age that created the bond between the steel and Stepan. The bond started so early in the age that Stepan was restoring old cars and bikes before he was even old enough to ride them. As per Stepan, the Sarpaneva Watches Company owes its creation to Stepan's passion for motorcycles. This is because to start a small company to make watches, Stepan had to make a choice, either to sell one of his first motorbikes he completely rebuilt into a custom himself, or keep the bike and the passion. The watch company as we know today, hence, started from the sale of that bike, yet in a modest way, and Stepan made his first Sarpaneva watch in his home kitchen using metal lathe machine. In this video, we are looking at Sarpaneva Northern Lights, one of the 8 ever produced in this green dial, green lume and overall green configuration. While this is a limited edition model, Stepan doesn't really make hundreds of pieces per year anyway. So there's a factor of limited production, limited availability, scarcity and handcrafting in any and every Sarpaneva watch you would ever own or come across. This is also because Stepan wants to continuously evolve the dials, the shape of the cases, as well as develop newer models in the Sarpaneva range. This completely original design of the dial also has an interesting background. One night, Stepan was walking back home with friends. The moon was bright when Stepan noticed a shining on the open-work iron grating laid on the ground, surrounding the trees on the street. Next day, Stepan was drawing the idea into the shape and made a paper cutout of the grating and began piling them one over the other. When he repeated this process with metal parts, a friend noticed that it looked like a crown around the sun's edge during a solar eclipse. And the result of that imagination, deliberation and visualization is this open-work steel grating type dial that we see today in many Sarpaneva watches. The show doesn't stop at the open-work dial, rather true to the name of Northern Lights, which is inspired by the naturally occurring lights at high altitude regions in the Northern Hemisphere. The K0 case is bezeled on Sarpaneva's K0 Sports or dive watch. Featuring a signature 46mm angular case, we have scallop bezel with a screw-down crown placed at 4 o'clock. This particular case is called Korona K0, which when translated in English means crown. And if you notice the case shape, there are 6 corners or points around the case, just like a crown. Where we see watches with painted coating for luminous infill on the dial, here we have a full luminous plate just under the dial. The luminous material is a hardened composite developed by Black Badger for Sarpaneva watches. This luminous plate, sitting beneath the open-worked scarlet portions of the dial, gleams and glimmers and offers possibly not just the brightest and longest lasting lume you would ever see, but is also the most interesting and mind-blowing too. On top of the dial, we then have circular hour markers and dial hands with superluminova that also glow green in the dark. Now the moon in the dial isn't lumed as such, but thanks to composite plate that provides lume like a light source. And then on the 3-dimensional moon, there's an experience and a vibe, or mystery, beauty, horror, smile and anxiousness all at the same time. One of the most iconic characters of Sarpaneva watches is the moon face, with moon having a three-dimensional face. Looking at the expressions of moon here, while many assume that the moon is angry, it actually isn't. As Stepan defines it, the moon is half smiling and half scowling, where the watch itself is a work of art from its case shape to open work dial and then the moon face. This lume adds a unique character and design element to the watch, where if you go out to see an alternative, there's simply nothing in the market to compete with Sarpaneva in terms of experience and joy on the wrist. Where you typically see lume in the watches to enjoy the beauty, with Sarpaneva, you would not only look at the lume, you would stare at it and be lost in the amazing experience it has to offer. The moon expressions here take the inspiration from the people of Finland, and as per Stepan, everyone roams around in Finland with an aura of slight melancholy, so a smiling face for moon would have looked out of context, and accordingly the expressions of the moon here represent a bit of indecision as to whether is he happy or sad in nature, to mimic the expressions of people in Finland. As for the form of moon, we have one moon in the dial made of white gold, and when that becomes a bit monotonous after a couple of weeks, we not just have a sky, rather the one with stars having lume, as if they are shining bright in the darkest night. After a beautiful and starry night, we have a second moon that's made of yellow gold, and that tastefully adds another flavor to the experience. The watch comes with Soprod A10 movement, which is heavily modified and is offered in open caseback and a rotor that features the same iconic Stepan's moon face. The movement is totally refinished at Sarpaneva workshop, starting from the main plate, which receives gilding after hand finishing. The separate moon face mechanism is designed and manufactured entirely in Helsinki. If you talk about attention to detail, there are 260 holes in the Korona's skeletonized style, and every single dial takes hours of hand finishing, because each hole on the dial is hand filed and polished to ensure that there are no high spots and burrs, and that the consistency of the dial is maintained even under close inspection. This does not only require effort and time, but also the skill and a steady hand, because the holes that are being filed and polished belong to a dial that is only 0.3 mm thick, or should I say 0.3 mm thin. On the wrist, the Sarpaneva Northern Lights wear like no other watch. The case, the dial, the lume and the moon face, and the overall experience on the wrist is something that's not only completely original, but is also something that you simply can't find elsewhere. It is a big watch and the case measures at 46 mm, but thanks to scalloped case bezel and then the relatively smaller lugs, it does not flare out or wear as large as you would expect from a 46 mm watch. The lug-to-lug height of the watch is 49.8 mm, and it is actually a relatively small lug-to-lug for a 46 mm watch. For reference, Tudor GMT at 41 mm has lug height of over 50 mm. The watch is also relatively thin for its size, and we have a thickness of only 12.5 mm, and it does seem thin on the wrist. My wrist size is 6.5 inches and wristband is 55 mm, and you can see that while it is a big watch, it does not stick out of my wrist. The watch comes with slightly domed crystal, which adds reflections to give more character to the watch. There's then alligator leather strap in green with tank buckle that has Sarpaneva name engraved on it. Out beyond the ideas of tool watches, integrated bracelet watches, precious metal watches and professional watches, if we talk about a watch which is a work of art, has original looks and design, and then the exclusivity, you actually speak with the watchmaker who designs it, customizes it to your preference, and then makes it by his own hands. And then especially if you talk about a moon face watch, where the moon actually has a three-dimensional face and expressions on him, you are looking at Sarpaneva watches. And then when you start to look at history of how Sarpaneva watches came into existence, the heritage of working with metal is not just decades old, rather it's generations old. But above all, if you really want a watch to not just take pleasure in watchmaking, but also to enjoy the work of art on display with every tick of second's hand, and then the look of moon, which is mysteriously smiling and then anxiously serious, you're looking at the beautiful Sarpaneva.